yesterday. I can't do the same thing today, but there are other people in the group from yesterday. So what I'll do is I'll do a different type of introduction of Professor Chih today, also because we have more time. And I hope that all the information that I got about you are actually true, and you can tell us what isn't true. No, not from Wikipedia. Well, Wikipedia is only one of the sources, let's put it this way. Anyway, Professor Chih is, as we've already realized yesterday, a specialist in IR theory, in anthropology of knowledge, in Chinese, in sinology and cultural studies, right? He has graduated, and that's something I didn't tell you yesterday at all. He's graduated from National Taiwan University, earned a MPP at Harvard, and then a PhD at the University of Denver. He's also visited many places, one of them being Tübingen University, which I will mention first, which is a very, very important place to do Taiwan studies, of course. But then he was also visiting at Stanford, at Duke, at Durham, and the University of Heidelberg, among others, but very, very brief time. Now, he's a true anthropologist who's done true field work, right? So he's actually worked on poverty, on ethnic identity, visited the Tujia, the Miao, the Yi, the Dong, the Dai, and many, many other minorities. He's worked on village autonomy. He's worked on people's congresses, on enterprise culture, and of course, people congresses in Beijing and enterprise culture in Shanghai. That's the way you should do it. Now, he also is a true Humboldtian scholar. Meaning that he has, for example, he's done other things than just academe, right? So he's coached, and now I'm excited to, he's coached mural basketball in Taiwan for several decades, and he even, brought at least 10, maybe more, national titles. Only 10, but then it's still 10. It was 10 years ago, it's still 10.
I'm the player, will be in August.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, but that's another thing, he prefers to play someone slower and shorter than himself. He also, that's another, something that you wouldn't expect necessarily in such an introduction, but I want to give you a little bit of detail, is he loves German sausages, so that's what he needs to eat tonight. He admires Bavarian castles. We don't have any here, but we do have others, and I hear that you're going to Schwetzingen, so that's almost as good as the little Versailles in Germany. And he also is an aficionado, I didn't know that, of ice cream, of all things, and I joined that club. He is a night owl and keeps late hours, really, still. He lives on the internet while in the dark. Yeah, this is from 10 years ago. So the source is from 10 years ago, and I rewrote it, and I'm now wondering whether the last thing is still going on. So they were, that's the myth, 10 years ago it was still so. Saturday gatherings on Chinese affairs held weekly in his apartment. In his apartment in the university? No, in the university. No, they've now moved to the university. That's right. In 2014, they were in their 23rd year, but now they're in their 33rd year. Is that still existing? Yes. Anyway, I also, just as a last sort of way of introduction, if my computer still lets me, I want to just give you a few more titles of books. Yesterday I gave you two that are forthcoming, that we haven't yet seen, with very nice covers, and Confucius and other covers that are not so nice also. But now, just for something sort of the kind of rhetoric that Chih Chih-yu is using. So, for example, I guess one of the first books is about China's just world, the morality of Chinese foreign policy. Not even the first, but one of the first books. And the first is, I guess, the spirit of Chinese foreign policy, right? So he gives a psychocultural view. But then, the one that I just realized you published in 2022 is the eros of international relations, right? International relations reconsidered self-feminism and the claiming of post-colonial Chineseness. That one I haven't actually seen, and I will read immediately. And you can see from what we've been discussing yesterday how that kind of colonizing yourself, or thinking in the colonial way in order to think differently, in order to unlearn, is very, very important. And today we're going to hear more about that, and next week is going to be even more exciting, I guess, because because Shi Ji is going to give us the clue on how we can solve Taiwan, U.S., China tensions by a very simple trick. And I'm not saying any more because he will tell you next week. So you need to come back next week. But before that, it's this week, again, with Taiwan-U.S. relations, but from a different key. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I should say thank you very much for all those introductions, which I already forget. I cannot eat too much ice cream these days, although I still love it. Yeah, and also chocolate. After yesterday, I realized many people here do not have the level of familiarity with the international relation literature. So I failed to attend to that ignorance. So I should try to avoid that. But it's hard to avoid because we're talking about ontological security, which is also full of jargons and terminologies. But we'll try. I think in international relations, most people would concentrate, especially in the policy world, in the policy tanks, would concentrate on the balance of power, meaning that if a state expands or gaining power, the other state would automatically be threatened. This is because international relations theoretically, logically, is an anarchy. No one controls. There's no central authority. So if someone becomes stronger, then you will be threatened. So you will try to enhance your own power. If you cannot do that in the short term, you will try to set up alliance. You will look for allies. So you can balance the increase of power of someone else to avoid being taken over or being bullied by that rising power. That's called balance of power. Balance of power can mean many things. I remember when I was in the master classes, my professor asked us to define balance of powers. Then everybody raised their hand and given their definition. There are 9 definitions written on the board. He was very satisfied. And I was a first-year foreign student, don't know how to speak English at that time. There I raised my hand and said, could I add a 10th definition? He was like, 10th definition, please go ahead. I said, well, balance of power is a system where there's no power dominant. Oh, he said that was very interesting. He never thought about that. Then he looked at his board and he said, actually, your definition is already in here. Then he said that 1 + 3 + 4 is your definition. But I guess my definition, in a way, integrate all other definition that he has already come up with from the floor. So no power dominates. That's the most important principle in the tradition international relations studies. Today, of course, we have all kinds of critics. We have all kinds of reflection on how this sort of theory may reproduce what we said yesterday, the colonial setup. But in the policy world, in the think tanks, this is still the dominant way of thinking. That's the balance of power. So coming to the triangle relationship between Taiwan, China, and the United States, you see all kinds of, perhaps since a decade ago, you see all kinds of simulations about how to respond to the PLA's military actions across Taiwan Straits. then of course you would ask why PLA would want to take military action. No, people don't talk about that. That is because international relations, we said, the most important thing is power. It's anarchy. You don't ask people's motivation. You already know everyone's motivation. You expect people know how you think, and they know you know how they think. That is to protect your safety by becoming, if not the most powerful, at least you are able to balance the most powerful. So you look at the capacity. You look at people's, other countries' level of power. Then you try to calculate. And the level of power determine what you will do. That's international relations study for a very long time. Regardless, the emerging reflections in the past 2 or 3 decades, in terms of the size of people who join this kind of a critical and reflexive thinking, in terms of size of population, I think it's already. I'm not sure this is. I don't have evidence to it, but then I think the size of population who are ready to accept this kind of a critical reflexive thinking is bigger than the people who stick with the traditional balance of power thinking. However, they still dominate in the real world, in the policy world, and there's almost I don't see any chance to replace them because this is a self-reproductive bureaucracy, self-reproductive systems. So you only look at the world by looking at the other countries' power. Here, of course, we assume every country is autonomous, integral, sovereign, and we criticized that yesterday. So all the simulations began with this. It doesn't matter this simulation coming from Australia or India, mostly, of course, from Europe and United States, some from Canada, a little from Japan, I understand. And we are also kind of into this fad in Taiwan that a lot of people and the students are doing simulations. Almost everyone begin with PLA's attack on Taiwan and how we should react. So it's a matter of the capacity to attack rather than the motivation or purpose of attacking. That's not important in the traditional international relations thinking. So you look at the power of the PLA, and then you try to figure out how you can stop them from attacking. And of course, the only solution, according to the balance of power thinking, is to attain enough power to stop PLA from attacking. The PLA would also calculate everyone else's power, and they would realize that they don't have enough power, so they will not attack. So the best thing to do is to accumulate enough power so you can stop PLA from attacking. And the same logic goes this way. Then the PLA will look at how all the other people are going to react. And if the other side gain sufficient power to counter PLA's power, then PLA would have to increase its power, right? When PLA increases power, the PLA would feel safer. But then Taiwan and Taiwan's ally would feel less safe. So they would also try to enhance their power. So you got this arms races. And this is the traditional notion of security dilemma. It has nothing to do with the motive of the nation state. It is the structure of anarchical international relations determined everyone would concentrate on the relative power of their own nation state to decide how safe they are and try to come up with a solution to enhance their safety. And of course, there's basically there are two different options. One is we call it internal balancing. That means you improve your relative level of power. You enhance your power. So you build up your arms. And there's also external balancing. That means you look for allies. Then you have sufficient allies that you can balance the threat of power. So you have all kinds of simulations everywhere in the world that cope with East Asian security. You have all kinds of simulations, all begin with PLA's attack on Taiwan. And they try to figure out when they're going to use nuclear weapon or they're not going to use it at all, how they're going to move the troops to Taiwan or they're not going to move their troops to Taiwan. What if they resort to blockade, and how long Taiwan can sustain, how many electrical power Taiwan have if being blocked. And some people say, oh, well, Taiwan can only sustain for 2 weeks if the power supply can only sustain for 2 weeks, for example. So you have to come to Taiwan's rescue within just 2 weeks. Some other people say, no. If there's a blockade, all the manufacturer will stop. Chip industry will stop. So you actually can sustain for 6 months. And PLA would not, cannot allow Taiwan's military to have 6 months to prepare for their physical invasion. So PLA would never use blockade. Just all kinds of arguments going on there. They're very logical, and they debate each other. The result, the consequence of each simulation, of course, has to do with its conditions, right? But all in all, it's the capacity of PLA that matters, rather than the motivation or the purpose of PLA, or PLA is being triggered by other reason, by Taiwan independence or by U.S. containment policy. Does that have to do with PLA's move? People don't talk about that. So that's the problem, because if you don't talk about that, we don't know when exactly or what would get PLA to take action, or someone else to take action. There are also, of course, from the counter argument side, that there is the scenario that the United States would want to trap China into cross-strait confrontation. So someone acting on behalf of the United States would pull the trigger or push the button, and then force the PLA to react. Otherwise, they would lose Taiwan if they don't react. So in order to escalate and trap China into this, there's other counter arguments. So actually, the first shot would come from Taiwan instead of from PLA. And of course, there are also a further argument that the PLA would also want Taiwan to take the first shot, so that they will have the legitimacy to invade Taiwan. So I think all these arguments, all these scenarios, can make sense logically, but so what? I mean that doesn't answer many puzzles. For example, that why would PLA feel threatened by Taiwan becoming more closely attached to American protection? Why is that the case? Taiwan has been under American protective umbrella since the end of World War II, since the beginning of the Cold War, throughout today. Taiwan has always been America's military ally. Also, during a very short period of time, there was the withdrawal of American troops from Taiwan in order to facilitate the diplomatic relationship with the PRC. So the American troops withdrew from Taiwan beginning in 1979. But then they now return to Taiwan. So you still have Marines in Taiwan this day, and Taiwanese troops are being trained in the United States, and all kinds of interactions. Of course, our weapons, Taiwan's weapons system is completely dominated by the United States. So if you look at this, as I'm not convinced that if Taiwan become a close ally, militarily speaking, with the United States, that would be a new threat to China. I don't see that threat being new. And the United States has always been stronger militarily than China. Always. There's never been in history any time that the Americans' military is weaker than China since the modernity starts. So why would China feel threatened by the United States? If the United States become more powerful militarily in East Asia, United States and Japan has always had this security treaty since 1960. And United States and Malaysia and Singapore always very cooperative in terms of, since the anti-communist campaign started in the beginning of the Cold War. Nothing has changed. Why would the people in Beijing suddenly feel more threatened and want to take action before it gets worse? I don't know. So there's no change of balance of power in East Asia simply because of United States supply military supply weapons to Taiwan, or adding more missiles or missile defense system, or just like United States being supplying to South Korea, to Japan. And Japan has built up its military. But you don't see China ready to take action to stop that. Also, of course, China is doing internal balancing from balance of power point of view. China is doing internal balancing by trying to enhance China's own military power. So you could still argue, well, there's arms race going on, but it has been going on for so many decades, and even during this arms races, you still see all kinds of engagement policy between China and the United States. Starting early 1980s, this engagement policy had dominated U.S.-China policy through, I think, 2020s perhaps. Even today, there's still a strong voice pushing for engagement with China. Also, official policy kind of turning more toward containment kind of thinking, the new Cold War thinking. So you see engagement during these arms races. So this is not a typical arms races. This is not typical security dilemma we would understand, you know. And if Taiwan become an independent country, let's say, that doesn't change the balance of power in East Asia. That doesn't change military relationship between Taiwan and the United States. Nothing would change if Taiwan declared independence. But everyone would assume that China would attack if Taiwan declared independence. So this is not the security dilemma that we understand. It makes all those military simulation, if not obsolete, become very awkward, right? If Taiwan independence, which doesn't change the balance of power, would trigger China's military action, what about this security dilemma would have a problem, right? But however, there's still something to military, to security dilemma. I call it ontological security dilemma or relational security dilemma. It is about the change of the way that we believe how we exist in the world. Everyone has certain way of belonging to the world, have certain way to live their lives, and we are accustomed to it. There's something going to significantly change the way we live our life without we expecting that. We don't anticipate something happen, then it happens, that we're going to change our ways of life. That's a threat, right? Or change the way we know who we are. That's a threat. Change the way we belong to the world. That's a threat. That would make us, would leave us unable to predict or understand the world. We cannot predict what's going on in the world. We cannot prepare ourselves for the world if the way we belong to the world changed. That I call this relational threat or ontological threat. That is a threat to the way the self exists in the world. or the self belong to the world. That's ontological threat. And Taiwan independence belongs to this kind of ontological threat because there's no relational world in the Chinese mindset, primarily people sitting in Zhongnanhai, in Beijing, in authority. There's no other way to explain to their people how Taiwan independence can fit into their familiar world. So they will lose their legitimacy. And losing legitimacy, of course, is an ontological threat. In that regards, we could almost even argue that traditional security dilemma or balanced relationship is also about ontological threat, as we touched upon this yesterday, that balance of power has the assumption that all nation-states are integral, autonomous. But this is not about the majority of nation-states in the world today. It is only in colonizer state that can claim they are integral and autonomous and assume everyone else are that. If you're not that, then you have a problem. We have to intervene you, right? And that becomes your ontological security threat. So balance of power is a result of ontological construction. It is an ontological imagination of anarchy existing between nation states, which are all integral and autonomous. So if you seek nation state which could not act as integral, autonomous actor, then those states become an ontological threat. Right? You call them, if they cannot manage themselves, they pollute the environment. They could not peacefully settle the social and political ethnic privilege in their society. They are what? They are failing state. So they don't belong to the normal ontology. They are not normal state, they're failing state. Right? If, however, they are able to group themselves and sustain this colonial history and still act as an autonomous integral state in the world, but refuse to cooperate in the rules-based order, they are rock state. So they are not normal either. So they should be even a clear target of intervention than the failing state, because the failing state is not going to threaten you immediately. They're going to threaten their own people. They're going to kill their own people. They pollute their environment. But the rock state going to create a problem for you. So the rock state is a problem. The rock state is ontological threat. North Korea doesn't change the balance of power in the world. But it's ontological threat because such a state can own nuclear weapon. That cannot be tolerated. Right? And that also become an issue between North Korea and China. And China hoped North Korea would refrain from developing nuclear weapon in order for China to give United States a favor. United States keep pushing China to stop North Korea from developing nuclear weapon. Just like when China trying to reestablish relationship with the United States in order to cope with Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 70s, they want Vietnam North Vietnam to slow down their war against the South. From Chinese thinking, relational thinking, if I can deal with the United States better, then I can take care of you in the future. I can stop the United States from invading you if I have good relations with the United States. So you should endure the breakthrough of relationship between China and United States at the present time. So North Korea resort to relational threat to China. So Kim Jong-un refused to see to visit China. Actually, his father already refused to visit China, and Kim Jong-un refused to visit China too because he needed to show to his people he can resist China's pressure. So it becomes very embarrassing for China that the United States pushed China to put pressure on on North Korea. But China could not do that, at least it could not do that publicly, because Chinese people would think, how could you do this to North Korea? It's an Asian country, it's a communist comrade, it's developing countries. Everything you can categorize North Korea, you belong to that category. So how could you do this to North Korea in order to satisfy potentially your enemy in Washington? So when North Korea threatened not to visit China, that's a relational threat. So that forced Chinese authority to hide all their displeasure and dissatisfactions with Pyongyang, with North Korea. So that's ontological security issue. You cannot handle a small, weaker party in your neighborhood to challenge your authority. Because if you let the rest of the world see North Korea broke its relationship with China, then other countries around China would think twice about the relationship with China. So it's not just the relationship between North Korea and China. That is already very significant. But that also have implication with relationship between China and other countries. Other countries will say, oh, you don't have even credit with North Korea. So all your promise to me can be problematic. So that becomes a trust issue. Trust issue is relational. And it's, of course, it's ontological issue. So all the balance of power, anarchy, is about construction of what a normal nation state should be. If you are not a normal nation state, you become a threat. That's ontological threat. So even balance of power, people looking only at your capacity, only at your level of power, that's still an ontological construction because that comes from the imagination of anarchy. And anarchy is composed of integral and autonomous nation state. But like we said yesterday, all these nation states are colonizer states. So I call this ontological thing. There's one perhaps exception that when physical threat, the threat to your physical security doesn't belong to ontological security. There's one exception. That's when we are infants. When we are infants, we were just born, we feel the gravity, and we could not handle the gravity. We feel hunger, we could not handle the hunger. And there's no cultural and illogical preparation for infants to explain what's going on. So that's a kind of a physical threat which is not ontological. all the ontology being constructed. So I have this idea of ontological security threat. I'm not the only person doing that. Ontological security threat has been mentioned in the literature. But I don't see anyone doing ontological security dilemma. There might be a very small literature touch upon ontological security dilemma. That is, when I try to protect my relational world, I threaten or ruin the relational world of someone else. That's I would call ontological security dilemma. There is very minor portion of the literature touch upon ontological security dilemma. Almost no one touch upon ontological security dilemma in a three-party scenario, in a triangle ontological security dilemma. In our case, United States facing the rising power of China, challenging its hegemonic status, challenging its rules-based order, because United States think in terms of balance of power. If you have power to challenge me, you will. There's no other possibility. There's no way just listening to you and you say you will follow the rules-based order. You will come to terms with the current international political economy. There's no way I will listen to you, because when you have power, you would set up your own rules. And I start collecting all your remarks and finding traces that you're going to destroy our world order. But that's ontological to the extent that that's a balance of power thinking, right? That's if you subscribe to anarchy, if you subscribe to balance of power as a necessity of all nation state, then you would believe that the rise of any power would challenge your hegemonic status. It will challenge the current international order. So you would want to stop that. So for the United States, it's very important that China will not take over Taiwan. That means the destruction of the status quo. And the most important sign for a hegemonic power to continue its status, its control, is the ability to maintain the status quo. If the status quo disappears without the permission or approval of the hegemonic power, or not facilitated by the hegemonic power, then that's a sign of declining, right? So the United States would not allow China to take over Taiwan. So that's an ontological threat to the United States if Taiwan is forced to join China, to unify it with China. That's ontological threat to a hegemony, to a hegemonic power, which is responsible to maintain the status quo of international order. And for Taiwan, of course, there is a relational threat. We're always talking about, this triangle. There has been a time, I think it was in the 90s, we had almost every week in Taiwan an international conference sponsored basically by Ministry of Foreign Affairs to inviting all the big names from all over the world to write something about triangle games, security game between Taiwan, United States, and China. Taiwan would not get any recognition diplomatically on the world stage. But in the triangle game, Taiwan appeared to be an equal partner. So we've been inviting all the famous scholars coming to Taiwan to do this scholarly conference to show how Taiwan is actually an equal partner playing triangle game with the other major powers. But there is a caveat. Because Taiwan had no options to balance. It's not an option for Taiwan to balance the United States if the United States become the strongest power. According to the game theory, according to the triangle security dilemma, two weaker powers would join force to balance the strongest power, which is the United States. Who would imagine that Taiwan would join China to balance the United States? That's beyond out of the questions. In other words, this triangle game is a relational game for Taiwan. It's to show the relationship between Taiwan and the United States is so strong that nothing can break it. So it's a relational diplomacy. It's a statement of identity, a statement of relationship, a statement of belonging, rather than really a balance of a game. But it is presented as a balance of a game structure in an anarchy. So Taiwan has this, maneuvering and facing the China threat, and no one explained why China wants to threaten Taiwan if China and Taiwan are the weaker power in the triangle. So why China would threaten Taiwan? So you see all the assumption there is already relational. This constructed ontology already built in this anarchical thinking, which is never an anarchy. And ironically, in the political science or international relations circle in Taiwan, you will find the realist people debating each other vehemently because they have different positions on the cross-strait relationship. But you will see liberals and realists cooperate with one another intimately as long as they have the same position on cross-relationship. So it is their position on cross-relationship determine how they appropriate liberalism and realism. So and that's also relational and ontological behind all this scholarship. So I start looking at this relational or this ontological security dilemma. I realized that if United States is worried about China taking over Taiwan, destroy the credit of United States as hegemonic power, United States would support Taiwan, would have to support Taiwan. It's the ontological security of the United States compared to the United States to support Taiwan. And it is ontological security for Taiwan to avoid peace pact with China. A lot of people forcing, this peaceful resolution. You can sign some kind of agreement between two sides to keep it status quo. Taiwan will not declare independence. China will not do anything drastically or militarily across Taiwan Strait. Why don't we just sign this? A lot of people actually talk about that in the early 1980s. In the early 1990s. And even there are strong voices in Taiwan pushing toward that direction. Why don't we sign peace agreement? And President Lee Teng-hui in the 1990s mentioned that. Of course, Professor Ma Ying-jeou also mentioned that, especially before the election of his campaign for the second term. Then he proposed to sign some kind of a peace agreement with China. But then, less than 24 hours later, he swallowed his campaign advertisement. Of course, that was because of the pressure of the United States. So he wrote 3 or 4 conditions before Taiwan should sign peace agreement with China. And if you look at all these conditions, none of that can be fulfilled in reality. So he doesn't really have to sign. So he basically swallowed his words. So that's relational or ontological security for Taiwan. Not to appear, first of all, you have to listen to the United States. Second, you cannot have this completely stable peace relationship with China. Imagine this, if Taiwan and China could maintain peace for 50 years, wouldn't a lot of Taiwanese go to China to work, to study, and Chinese students coming to Taiwan to work and study? Wouldn't that remind all the Taiwanese people that their culture are almost the same with Chinese? Wouldn't that reduce the determination to pursue independence? So that becomes a relational threat. The cross-strait relationship, if intensified, that becomes a relational threat. If confrontation between cross-strait relations is completely out of the question, that becomes an ontological threat to Taiwan. You will reduce people we always say this, and we continue saying this for 20 years, that what we call the psychological defense, 心防. If you have very good relationship with China, if you have all kinds of cooperation with China, if Taiwanese companies go to China, Chinese companies come to Taiwan, then you will lose your psychological defense. Then you will eventually become part of China without even feeling it. So that's ontological threat. We couldn't do that. And why couldn't we do that? We touched upon that yesterday, because this is inferior civilization. Why was that inferior civilization? Because they don't have colonial modernity. Why colonial modernity is so important? Because Chinese migrant regime looked down upon the population which was once being colonized by Japan. So colonial modernity become the root of self-respect for Taiwanese population. So the relationship with China, the relationship with migrant regime has to be handled through this colonial modernity point of view. And the migrant regime, when losing their power, appeal to their Chineseness in order to enhance popularity. So they need to cooperate with Chinese, cooperate with the PRC in order to demonstrate to people that they can resolve cross-strait confrontation. And then that becomes evidence that the migrant regime is an agent of Chinese communists. So all this starts. And then Chinese communists is being treated as the migrant regime in Taiwan. Even today, with Democratic Progressive Party in power for such a long period of time, I think if we include Chen Shui-bian's first term, there's over 10 years under pro-independence regime. But if you look at Democratic Progressive Party's behavior, they still act like an opposition party. They are the ruling party, but their action, their thinking is still like an opposition party, because in their mind, it is the Communist Party still ruling Taiwan. It is the Communist Party threatening Taiwanese people or suppressing Taiwanese people from briefly declaring their independence. And Democratic Progressive Party cannot do anything about it because their power is not enough. So in their mentality is still opposition party. And because of this mentality, they will do a lot of things that you wouldn't expect the incumbent party would do. Right? So, but anyway, that's what I mean by ontological threat to Taiwan. Cross-relationship is an ontological threat to Taiwan independence. And rise of China is an ontological threat to the United States. And Taiwan independence is an ontological threat to China. We already mentioned that. It was because this legitimacy, all this 150 years national sham, this kind of a discourse has been going on for so long. There's no way to change that now, that they trap themselves into this kind of a national sham discourse. And plus, the rise of power, giving people the expectation that China can really influence the world now, that you have this much higher relative deprivation, that you think you are a strong and equal power in the world. You are at par with the United States, but you could still not win the respect you think you could win. So there's a stronger relative deprivation. And then you have this Taiwan independence going on, taking advantage of this kind of a situation, taking advantage of the American support, taking advantage of American security, ontological security anxiety toward the rise of China. Taiwan could secure a united support. And then there is the security dilemma between Taiwan and the United States, because Taiwan needs to show to China that Taiwan is not part of China. But if you force that too much, United States would worry that you will drag United States into a military competition with China. But on the other hand, United States may have intention or motivations to trigger confrontation across Taiwan Strait using Taiwan as some people say they use Ukraine. They may use Taiwan to trap China in a prolonged war so that it could slow down China's development. So there is also the dilemma of Taiwan being trapped into this relationship, become a vicarious war machine for the United States. So there is a kind of a moral hazard going on that it seems they have such a close relationship, but that each has also its own calculation that may trap the other side into the other's game. Then there, of course, there is security, ontological security dilemma between the two sides. If Taiwan want to show Taiwan is completely different from China, so their language is different, their religion is different, their culture is different. Chinese culture is only one component that Taiwan collect in its history. So Taiwan become a category, a scope, which collect Aboriginal culture, collect European culture, including Netherlands, including Spain, and including American, of course, and including China, fortunately or unfortunately, and including Japan. So Taiwan is really a world side. We can reworld China. So Chinese contribute to Taiwan's being a world actor, but Taiwan has never been part of China. Since if you consider Taiwan being an integral autonomous actor, then Taiwan cannot be part of China. So if Taiwan push toward that cultural decentralization, that would be an ontological threat to China. So China would do all kinds of design all kinds of privilege, policy privilege for Taiwanese people to enjoy in China. So China would show goodwill to counter Taiwan's relational threat. But then the more goodwill China showed to Taiwan, the stronger relational threat Taiwan felt from China. So they would have to intensify their cultural decentralization. And that would force China to look at all the corners in Taiwan, wherever there is a chance they could provide some kind of advantage or privilege. They do it so that they could establish a relationship with hopefully with everyone in Taiwan. So this is kind of a ontological security dilemma, right? You have this relation, you do something to protect your ontological security, then you threaten the other side. So the other side counter the threat, the relational threat you pose to them, and with their own scheme and device in order to secure their ontological position, ontological security. And then that threatens Taiwan, right? So the more Taiwan try cultural decentralization, the more China would want to seek potential allies in Taiwan and try to do something good there, try to establish a relationship there. It's like playing Chinese Go, right? You play, you put stone somewhere on the board. You don't know which stone would be used for connection in the future. You don't know. You're just trying to establish as many stronghold as possible. You just try to have as many allies in Taiwan as possible. All these are silent. All these are implicit. You just do this. You invite the very rudimental level officials to tour China, provide them travel grants like that, and this has been going on for years and years until not too long ago. I think maybe a decade ago, this became outlawed. You cannot tour China, and in university it becomes bizarre because in the past when we go to China, we always have to pay our own travel, and when we invite Chinese scholars to Taiwan, we also pay their travel because their development is not up to that level. Until in the 21st century, the situation changed. If we go to China, they'll cover our travel expenses. If they come, they cover their own travel expenses. So we're happy, and when we ask for conference leave, for example, to the university, we say, we don't spend 1 penny from your budget. So you should feel happy. Now you couldn't do that. Now you have to write, we're not going to use any penny from the other side. We're going to use our own money. So you should let us go. All these tiny things, you see the change there, but people don't know from outside, right? When we write our report, when we ask for conference leave, where do you get your money? People would ask, university would ask, right? We are happy to say we don't spend your money in the past. Now we are afraid to say we don't spend your money in the past if we go to China, because you immediately would start some kind of investigation on who you're going to see, why you get this money, what you're going to do afterwards. They would ask you this kind of question. And when you return from China, you also write a report. Whom you have seen. Do you encounter any harassment? Do you encounter any conscious harassment from national security people? Or do you encounter any subconscious or indirect harassment from scholars who host you? Harassment meaning trying to be good to you. That's harassment. Because that makes you uneasy to be a pro-independence person, right? So you wouldn't say anything candidly to your Chinese host that you want Taiwan independence. And of course, it is assumed that everyone should say that. So that's relational security dilemma is going on. And I think this kind of security dilemma, especially this triangle security dilemma, is very tricky. So if China is not threatened by the United States simply because the United States become militarily stronger, then there is no issue if United States appear more frequently in South China Sea, for example. That would be direct interaction with China, right? China and United States would directly interact in South China Sea. That's balance of power, right? But you wouldn't expect anything accidental happen because both United States and China would try to avoid military clashes. So United States keeps saying that we should avoid clashes. And this is our responsibility to the whole world because both countries have all kinds of relationship with the whole world. I was like, oh, Blinken has become a Confucianist who can accept non-solution as a solution. This could never be imagined in the past, right? But anyway, if United States and China face each other directly, you don't have this kind of ontological security threat. You only have security dilemma instead of ontological security dilemma. You have both sides trying to show that they are militarily capable of balancing each other off. But that's about it. They're not going to have clashes over South China Sea. But across Taiwan Strait, if stronger U.S. military advantage over China does not pose a relational threat to China, China wouldn't take action across Taiwan Strait. China would not try to take over Taiwan to demonstrate that United States is no longer a hegemonic power. That's not in the Chinese relational ontology. Whether or not United States can sustain its hegemonic status in the world is not an essential element in China's relational world. Even though United States continues, that wouldn't threaten the legitimacy of Communist Party, right? But if United States support Taiwan, Taiwan would push for independence. And that becomes a different matter. That becomes a relational threat to China. So if the United States continues supporting Taiwan militarily and enhance its technology and the level of destruction, then there will be a relational threat to the United States because Taiwan would take advantage of that kind of a military support to continue its independence endeavor. So that's kind of a relational dilemma we're facing across Taiwan Strait. It's not the direct military threat of the United States toward China. It's not Taiwan becoming part, Taiwan independence would destroy the military balance across Taiwan Strait. That's not the issue. No. So all this military simulation that we see going on so frequent, well, I guess they make money out of this simulation. I think it's misleading. Doesn't matter whether they just do that for the sake of making money from the government, whatever their private incentives are, they reproduce this image of classic balance of power. Everything is about capability. And forget about the support, the military support of the United States to Taiwan can trigger a ontological security dilemma, and to a level that would become a real military clash. let's see how the time goes. So we should stop here to hear people's comments and critique. Yeah.
Okay, so who wants to go first? The question, even though some of us are not specialists, as already said, but they are. Let me hand this over to you. And introduce yourself to Professor Shi. So
yes, thank you. I study in the master degree of sinology. I did some politics research in my bachelor's degree, but I'm also not a politics expert. I do have a question about, actually, Japan in the 1990s. There was also calls from the US that there should be containment because Japan is going to threaten the hegemony of the US. And after the slowdown in the 1990s, all of that has basically disappeared. And Japan has kind of like established itself as a regional power, but still not a threat to the US. And I was wondering if we are seeing right now in China, there's been an economic slowdown, there's been social problems, we have all heard of it, like youth unemployment, etc. Could we see something similar, that China's position basically doesn't threaten the US anymore? So the whole dilemma of ontological threat just solves itself by China having to back down?
Like I said, I think the level of power is not really the crucial thing. It's the relation, ontological relation, imagination, that's the crucial thing. So if the United States can come up with a substitute enemy, then they could let China go. There is a wonderful book in 1992 published by University of Minnesota Press by David Campbell. It's called Writing Security. He basically traced all the enemies that the United States, in the American diplomatic world, the United States created all those enemies, one enemy after another, in order for the United States to survive its being there. So it's very interesting. It's an ontological argument right from the beginning, but at that time, people don't use this terminology. And Japan has, like I said, maybe 1 or 2 years. And after that, it was Colombia for a short period of time because of this drug situation in the United States. So they consider Colombia is the biggest sources of drugs. But it's just impossible. Only after, I think, mid-1990s, China has become the next target. And the Chinese didn't realize that until a few years later. So you have this idea of a harmonious world, you have this peaceful rise to handle this kind of a threat image. But it was too late. The first country, the first think tank that came with the idea of a China threat was actually Japan in 1990. So that's the first time that China threat as a term being used. I think, for example, the attack on the Twin Towers, that's a release for China because the United States had another target. So if you have alternative, either just tentatively for time being, or better, someone can take much longer as a target of the United States.
Would you say Russia could take that place after Ukraine?
I couldn't predict. I don't know.
Yeah, because kind of like right now, Russia is going to more like a failed state than a rising power, right? So I was just wondering.
It depends how you look at it. Go ahead. There's the expert. No.
Question. It's just a two-finger add-on to the question. Don't laugh. So, thinking of ontological security, I mean, Russia or the Soviet Union was, in this logic, already defeated by the United States. So if Russia would come back as the core enemy, it would mean that the US actually has lost the Cold War, which is ontologically impossible.
That's why people say the linear historiography toward modernity cannot fail. If that fails, the dark world, city of gods will come back. because the history no longer linear, could go backwards. I don't know. I think Secretary of State, United States, in 1990, testified in Congress. In 1990, Soviet Union already collapsed. Soviet Union collapsed overnight. Who could predict it will not come back overnight? That's his testimony. In order to, of course, secure budget for military. So you never know. I know they wouldn't, but don't ask questions.
Yes? Okay, there is one. No? Oh, there isn't.
Go ahead.
Then Maximilian, I guess.
I cannot answer his question.
I feel threatened in my ontological security.
That's what I'm going to say, but you said first.
First of all, thanks so much. It's, as always, absolutely great listening to you. And I have sort of one comment and one question. One comment is, if I understand you correct, you're saying the US is following basically balance of power approach. And I would challenge that. I think the US has also a very strong ontological, relational ontology, right? And so it's just two things. I mean, the US has certainly the relational ontology of a hegemon. And in that sense, I think it has very well understood China's own relational ontology. I think that's the reason why we have, ever since they established diplomatic relations, the ambiguity principle and the idea of strategic unclarity, and so exactly to keep the status of Taiwan where it is. And I would argue that has worked quite well for a long time, right? So the US is also I would say, a coherent and anticipating manager of that sort of ontological level. And I think also it cuts also the way back. I mean, the US cannot imagine there is, as a hegemon, you cannot imagine, right? There is another power almost as strong as you and is taking a place in a world system. That's impossible. And that's not a balance of power issue. That's an ontological issue, I would argue, right? Okay, so... So I would argue that the logic applies equally to the US, right? And it's not like US balance of power thinking and China ontological or relational ontology. And so, but I have a more, I think, more serious question. I'm really curious. So the relational ontology of a country, can that change over time, or is it stable? And if it can change, what are actually the drivers, or whose agency is changing the relational ontology? My name is Maximilian Meyer. I'm from Bonn University. Sorry, not to introduce myself.
And the specialist. Okay.
I think there are more agents capable of doing that than we can imagine. Migrants, for example, cross-border communities, mixed marriages. It's amazing these days. You go to an international conference, if you talk to scholars, you don't need much time to realize this person has an incredible migrant history of her or his families. Almost everyone is like that. Or maybe ISA is a weird place. You only gather these migrant scholars. But these people, there's no way to get away from this trans-regional or trans-cultural kind of interaction. And this is so. I think there are a lot of forces out there doing things beyond the comprehension of people who only think in terms of nation state. So they're doing their things. They're using the tax or tariffs they collect from those moving populations to do things in terms of protecting them, disallowing them from moving across borders. So I think there are a lot of possibilities there to change. But I think what you want to ask is, what can change those people in the policy positions so they would think in a different relational terms? I think different political leaders have different relational terms. Hu Jintao and Deng Xiaoping have different relational terms. They have different backgrounds. Xi Jinping, of course, have very different background from all his predecessors. His experience during the Cultural Revolution, to get him into this poverty becomes a crucial issue in his regime. Corruption becomes something he thinks is evil. So he must get rid of that. And then he applied that internationally. So I think personality can also play a role there. But no, I have not thought about this question. But I think there are more possibility than we can imagine.
I'll do the students first.
Yeah, you already know me. I have 3 aspects or questions. If you already mentioned it, I'm sorry. But so in this scenario of this triangle ontological security dilemma, what would then trigger a Chinese attack? So we have the Taiwan declaring independence. Is there something else, maybe coming from the US side, which could trigger it? For instance, showing more support than before? Or is it, in your view, only this declaration of independence that would trigger an attack? Then the second question is, so what is the best case scenario then? Is it maintaining the status quo like it is now? Because it seems a bit, I'm not sure if it's right, but that the biggest part of the Taiwan population would want that. No conflict, and also no spiral of power, conflict, not going down a spiral of provocation. And then the third question, like the aspect of identity, because you were mentioning that in this context, Taiwan is basically forced to de-Sinicize. So I was thinking, even if they maybe don't want to de-Sinicize, it's kind of a strategic thing they need to do and let go of this Chineseness they might have, because it makes sense in a way. And then yesterday you said that an interesting sounding sentence, that Taiwan will not redefine itself, and that might be will not define itself or redefine itself. I'm not sure if you said it like this, but that's what stuck in my mind. And that this will in a way save Taiwan, even if there should be an attack, and even in the scenario of Taiwan becoming reunited with China, this inability to define the Taiwanese identity could then in a way still be a way to maintain a way of sovereignty or national identity that's not Chinese.
I forgot the first question, but second, third, first, and then I go back to first. Second question was the best scenario. I think the best scenarios in the future is people no longer subscribe to this nation-state ontology. People move away from that because of developments, whatever developments taking place. I don't know what would trigger that, but it already appears that many people, especially the elite, they are transnational. They are cooperating all over the world. So best scenario for me is nation states is only one scheme of organization that's responsible for perhaps public security, that sort of things. And what would trigger China's military action other than independence? I don't even think independence would necessarily trigger China's military action. I don't know. They would have to decide. They say they will, right? They have to say they will today. Otherwise, they're going to collapse. But when things really happen, they still have a second chance to think. So what would trigger? I think perhaps I wouldn't expect this, but that if there's a serious political cleavage in Taiwan, and there's someone invite China to rescue their threatened life, then there might be a possibility of Chinese intervention. But even that is very the opportunity is chance is very rare.
So if Taiwan invites China,
If there's a serious political cleavage in Taiwan, some people feel threatened, life being threatened, they would invite China to rescue them. Then China might think it's better to intervene. Otherwise, they're going to lose credit among those people who support him, who support China.
What would the US do then?
Well, I don't know. They would have to think about that. I mean, they may prepare that. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. So, and the first question is?
That was actually what would trigger that you just answered.
Okay.
But the third question was about the aspect of identity and de-Sinicizing as a strategic.
Whether that's a strategy, and there is a joke in the 90s that Hong Kong people think they're Chinese, but they are more Chinese than Chinese, but they're really not. And Taiwanese people don't know they're more Chinese than Chinese. There is such a joke. They compare Hong Kong with Taiwan. Yes, I think the way we think, the way we handle things, the way we maintain relationship, the way we give gifts, we are very Chinese. But we can give it different names that make us feel better. Yeah, so.
That's honest.
But that would be very strange, and I know it's Marina's call, really, because Taiwan would, for many, many years, be the place where, Chiang Kai-shek would say, we need a 复兴文化运动 because they have a 打革命, so we have to sort of 保留 this culture that is being destroyed in the mainland, which it wasn't being destroyed, but anyway, wouldn't that be a real turnaround to actually say we're no longer the bastion of Chinese culture?
I did a little research on this term called cultural renaissance. 复兴基地. GD is base. The base for Chinese cultural renaissance. This terminology was very popular during the KMT times. So I did a search in the data bank. It basically disappeared after 1992. You just can't.
So there's no 文化复兴anymore.
Taiwan is no longer the base for Chinese cultural renaissance. It was like 50,000 times, and maybe 30,000 times, and then gradually it becomes 12 times. It becomes just like completely disappear, and it reappeared in a very bizarre way in much later time. But then you look at the context, you're actually saying that Tainan is a cultural base for cultural renaissance. Has nothing to do with China at all. So
you said someone had his. Is there anybody who has an urgent question? Not right now. They will come when Marina has asked all the questions.
Okay, then I start with one. And I want to dig a little bit deeper into what you said, that China does not feel threatened by the US because actually nothing has changed about the US presence. But this is not exactly true because, well, I could see at least two things that have changed and which of course have to do with Taiwan. So maybe you would say nothing has changed actually. And these two things are first tax sanctions. And second, that China is now on the menu of NATO, which is a new thing. So NATO last year has defined China as a threat, which was quite a big step because suddenly you have a threat that is outside of the geographically transatlantic space. But now the reason why China is a threat is, again, it's Taiwan and it's the South China Sea. So my question is it kind of part of all the same ontological security dilemma? Or is it a qualitative change?
It is a traditional ontological security dilemma in Marx-Median sense. It is anarchy, the believing anarchy, but this is different ontological security threat that Taiwan poses to Taiwan independence poses to China. It's different kind of relational. It is the traditional anarchical kind of ontological security threat is a kind of threat that reproduced colonial scheme, colonial mindset. That's just, this is a given to China. And China, in order to win respect in the colonial system, they have to defeat other colonial power by colonial standards. So in that sense, they feel threatened because they are exposed. They're still vulnerable. They're still weak in that sense. Otherwise, why would they care? If you look at all the territorial disputes that China have been involved, some of them China could just let it go. As long as we renegotiate 95% of the border drawn by past colonial powers will be approved by China. But you have to go through this process of approving. So that means I give this land to my neighbors, despite this land was given to them by the colonial powers. So the land is really not a crucial issue sometimes. If you are an enemy, if you try to destroy the respect a rising, or doesn't have to be rising, an independent autonomous country is entitled to, then even 1 inch of land, they could not give up. That's why I say it's ontological. So if you look at the border disputes along Chinese, well, most of them have been resolved. Usually, especially between China and Vietnam on this this Bay issue, this
Beibuan,
right, and then
Gulf
Beibuan,
of
right.
Tonkin.
Eventually, I think they get 50%, 50%. Basically, China yield half of the Beibuan to Vietnam, but Vietnam was not satisfied. Vietnam said we should have the 100%. But that's what they say. The China already gave face to Vietnam. So Vietnam achieved its ontological security by getting China to yield. China maintained its ontological security by not giving everything to Vietnam. So it's really not territorial. It's really how territorial signify your being a sovereign independent nation state by colonial standard.
So maybe a follow-up question, which you don't have to answer now, but then how, so Qin Yaqing has this opposition of relationality and rationality. And thinking, in terms of real policy, can it be reconciled at all?
I think rationality is also relationality. Right, like Max, yeah, it's all relation.
I'm very sorry to cut in. I just thought about something I was also thinking about earlier and thought maybe I can just ask about it now when you're talking about it. There's some territories in the northern part of China that belong to Russia now, basically, that China had at some point, but nobody's talking about it. Basically, China is not asking Russia back for it, and Russia is not defending it. And isn't there some kind of when is the territory in question? When do we see it as an ontological threat? Because this should be one, right? But everyone is just ignoring it.
It is really a trust issue. Do I think you are willing to maintain relationship with me? If I have this trust, then all issues can be left to the future to decide. Otherwise, I will have to make sure that you don't push. I have to push back. I call this patient. But nobody in international relations write about patient. There is only one guy write about patient, but patient for him is a strategic tool to wait for the right time and get you. That's because I'm not capable of doing that now. But there are real patients everywhere of all countries, even United States can be patient toward Cuba, for example, or or engagement policy. That's patience, right? Although later on they figure that liberalization of China is not possible. they feel deprived. So patience is a very important issue. Look at China and Japan over the Senkaku Island. It's interesting that domestic politics in Japan forces into a property of Tokyo City, and then China start patrolling around the islands, and then you have Japan taking the land, China taking the seat. So they still maintain that kind of relations for a while without trying to push for a solution. And China and India not pushing any indefinite solution, even though they got into deadly fist fighting, but then neither side trying to push a solution. Yeah.
I mean, just a quick question on the China-Indian relations, because I think that's another example where on the physical level there has been something changing, right? I mean, there's significant infrastructural installations on the Chinese side, and that's totally different like 10 or even 5 years ago. So I wonder, I think there is no strategic patience left in the sense of building fortifications and defending that, I mean, being able to defend that borders. Yes, they're still using sticks and no weapons, so they're still patient on that level, but the infrastructural level has been expanded a lot. And maybe you can comment on that, and then just a two-finger on what Marina said. I think actually at the moment you have both security dilemma dynamics going on. You have the traditional one,
Right.
and that's definitely going on, because I think
I call that colonial.
Yeah, I haven't been there 2 days ago. I don't know, so I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. But I mean, I'm talking about Chinese, the whole blue water navy and aircraft carriers. So I think there is a real change in the balance of military power, despite the U.S. putting more troops to Asia Pacific. But actually, in terms of number, it hasn't done so much. It was there already, but there's not a significant shift yet. So we have both, right? We have that traditional one, and we have the ontological, the relational one, I think, at the same time. And I think when both of them intersect at a very unfortunate moment, that's the moment when we have war, not necessarily only in the relational level, right? Because they can work against each other as well, right? Or they can balance or cancel each other out.
Yeah, an alternative way to approach whatever you have described is to think in terms of bluffing. It's not looking for a solution. It's a way to boycott any solution, because solution would at least destroy the ontology of at least one side. So the better way is not to have a solution. So in order to avoid you push for a solution, I'll push back. But when I show my physical capacity to push it back, I don't force a solution. That's the better way to do it. The same thing with China-India relations. I forgot to mention one example. That's China and North Korea. There is dispute, right? But if you look at the Chinese map, the borderline was drawn. There's a color, right? There's between countries, there's a borderline. Then you draw a red line or a brown line. That line covered the dispute area, so you couldn't tell which side the area belonged. So that's a way to. That's what I mean by non-solution and patient.
A completely different question, because it's fascinating to me, who's normally doing cultural studies, right? How you are basically talking about predictabilities, right? That I, as a sort of literary scholar, you wouldn't necessarily do that, right? Because it seems to me also you're saying China, you're saying the US, but to me it's always Xi Jinping or Hu Jintao or Mao Zedong, or, you know, and I know that these are human beings, and human beings are taking decisions sometimes because they don't feel well, or, you know, they just say something, they do something, and it actually makes something happen that has nothing to do with any ontological or other type of security threat, but just with them being in a bad mood or something like that, right?
possible.
So how does that figure in political scientific thinking, right? Because it seems to me, I'm fascinated because it seems to me that all what you're doing here is very philosophical, right?
Yeah.
No, seriously, no, seriously.
Yeah,
I'm not making fun of this at all. I'm trying to be very, very serious, right? Yeah.
I said that myself. I said that myself in my book. So this is a philosophical. This is not. But
I find yours just as philosophical and Marina's as well. So and if I talk to Sebastian Hanisch, who's a very down-to-earth political scientist, I also, I sometimes just sit there and think, but it's not as if China.
Right, you're right.
Is acting or doing according to some predictable sort of developmental right, but it's actually somebody, and they they might just have a fart, like whatever. I mean, there might be all kinds of reasons. Anyway,
you're absolutely right. When I write, I'm very consciously not using China if it is the actor. I only use China when it is an object. Others try to do something to China, but I don't, because that's in others' eyes. There is a China, but I don't use China as a subject. I avoid that. But when I talk, I have this linguistic barrier, just prevent me from, using the right terms. I just don't have, and then automatically just come out. I consciously noticed I'm using the term China when I speak, and I feel bad about it. But since you pointed out, I'm just saying I feel bad about it. I shouldn't, but
also in the US.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Also, yes. All of those nation things. It's problematic category. Absolutely problematic.
I feel like this is a disparity. Like this is a gap or a disparity that you have a lot in international relations and politics. And I think there's a common or like underlying consensus that when we talk about China, we mean not China, but we mean exactly.
When I
my question is actually it's going deeper. I'm not criticizing or I'm not saying why do you use China when it is Xi Jinping, Mao Zedong, and so on and so forth. But I'm actually thinking about Xi Jinping, Mao Zedong, etc. as human beings with all their faults and difficulties and so on and so forth, and therefore not being predictable in the way that I think in the system that I'm trying to understand here they become. Right, and this is my perennial discussion with Sebastian Hanisch, who is in international relations.
No, I'm not on political science side.
Yeah. Anyway, you want to? And there were two more people who wanted to actually raise that topic.
Should I edit now, or do you want to answer first? Okay, I mean it's just about. I'm the guy who studies political science as well, along Chinese studies, and I also took Sebastian Hanisch's classes because he's the international relations professor, and there's like all these theories, and I mean when we see China as a state and not as, because we just talked about it, not individual people making decision, it would be realism. But your three, talking about ontological security dilemma and this kind of topic, to me it doesn't seem to be. Or I don't think that you would put it in a realist theory frame. So where do you put your thoughts if it's not realism? Because if you just say China is a state, but it's also not constructivism. So where would you like put it?
I hope you can help me. I hope people put me in a category familiar to them instead of me creating one for myself. I don't know where I belong to. I think I use constructivism, but I'm sometimes very alert to its colonial legacies. So I don't know where I belong, but.
So what would like Sebastian Hanisch, for example, put you into? Because so if you don't belong to anyone, what do others would say about you?
He would imagine me being a role theorist.
a what? I didn't understand. Theorist.
I'm a different kind of role theorist than he is, but he's not interested in my kind of a role theory, I think. I think role for me is a scheme of socialization. That's very much in line with role theory, right? Role is a way to socialize people and this and that. But I'm more concerned about role relation rather than role. In other words, having a role is more important to what role to have. So if relation is the fundamental thing for any human being to live in the current world, then this person must have a role. So you may change your role, but you have to have a role. So I call this necessity of having a role as a role relationship.
Then I would add to this question. So if you talk about Xi Jinping, Mao Zedong, or whoever, and you would rather talk about China or other people as well in international relations, well, what deserves more merit or what has more real life application? Because one could also say, well, the Xi Jinping or whatever, they also have a role. They have the role of being the Chinese leader in one or the other position. So there might also be a thing that maybe doesn't change. So maybe, okay, of course there's a difference between Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping, but maybe there's like a residual part that is always the same because of their role as the leader of China. And maybe that's also part of this permanent.
Yeah, that can be
dilemma.
that can be a restraining role there. Once you become a leader, then you think you are expected to do certain things, right? You think you are expected to act angrily in certain contexts. So you will show your emotion, maybe not real, not sincere emotion, but you have to show your emotion. So you're right. I mean, there might be something there, but this role can be changed. The role of national leader in 1950 can be very different from the role of a leader in 2050. So hopefully.
Actually, if
Worse,
someone else
getting
hasn't
worse.
gotten his word in yet, I would gladly give it to them.
I think that's the side of the world is almost colonized.
Exactly. That's why I was trying to. You saw me. I went there specifically to invite them to ask a question, and it seems to be we're very right wing.
Yeah, but
I oppose
but I
this
think
position,
I think
please.
silence is power. Silence is power.
From our perspective, we are left wing. I'm just gonna say that.
But anyway.
Actually, I noticed while you were talking in the beginning, you always said PLA. You didn't use China.
Right, yes.
And
Yes, so I was still conscious at that time.
And I was actually wondering if you were conscious of that, because I'm researching about China's policy towards Afghanistan and which actors are influencing that. So it's basically exactly that. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on your theory being applied on a subnational level, on actors inside of one country basically influencing each other, or would you say it's a national state theory that is more contained on that level?
I think both. There are lots of interaction inside the country because every person would have to interpret and practice her roles. So there must be difference. So there must be, that's called a structuration, right? This is Anthony Giddens kind of stuff. But there is a collective that cannot be detected by simply looking at individual choices or individual practice of their roles. There is a collective, and this collective can come and go. It's like Confucius saying that water can carry the boat, it can overthrow the boat. But sometimes it's hard for you to anticipate when the water would rise to overthrow the boat. When it happens, you may from hindsight give some explanation and just try to explain it. But really, whatever explanation we gave will not determine when next time the water will rise again. So there is a collective force that cannot be detected in advance, I think. So it's both, I think.
Now Unless the left wing from this side of the room wants to raise a question now. No pressure, not pressure at all. But maybe the left wing does want to say something. No, I want to. 小白, okay, this is yeah.
If it's so important, then I first want to introduce myself. I'm from National Taiwan University, and I'm currently being a language teacher here. I'm an intern language teacher. I'm teaching Chinese and Taiwanese now, but actually back in National Taiwan University, I'm a master's student of teaching Chinese as second language. And and my master's thesis will be focused on Taiwanese teachers who teach Chinese, their identity crisis. Yeah, kind of. So today's lecture is very fascinating for me, and I really feel impressed. I feel very, very happy to. I don't really study politics, so I'm very happy to. But still, what you say is very interesting, and so what I want to ask is about the beginning of this ontological imaginary. So what you say is all about the imagination of United States, of China, or those leaders around them. So do you think there is any beginning of this ontological things, ideas?
I think it's a human need to stick together. So they have to find a way to explain what happened to them, but they don't know. There is earthquake, there's all kinds of natural movement. You don't know. So you appeal to cosmology, you appeal to gods, and then after a while, that help you to organize, coordinate, calm you down, and then become institutionalized.
What do you say? What your answer just remind me of the very classical book called Imagined Communities from Benedict Anderson.
Yeah,
and
but he imagined from very European perspective.
Oh, really?
And he went to China, went to Taiwan actually once. He thought that the best way to resolve the cross-strait relation issues is to give Palace Museum back to China, so China would no longer consider Taiwan being part of China. Then things would resolve.
Probably it could be Palace Museum.
For him, creating difference is more important, and the mix of blood is a demonstration of difference. Right, but from a Confucian culture, mix of blood is wonderful things. We expand. It's not a division. So there's also another book by a Stanford professor, Melissa Brown, she's also on the same line about this blood thing. It was like, for Han people, for the Han culture, mixing blood is a very good thing. Right.
Last question. Again to the other side of the room.
If I'm wrong, but I thought that it's forbidden, but maybe it's wrong because don't stone me, that it's forbidden to do a DNA test in Israel. So by this logic and governing Taiwan or China, it would be very much allowed and very much encouraged to do a DNA test in Taiwan, because then everyone find out most of them are Chinese, apart from the
No. That's not what they discovered. Well, that's not what they claim they discovered. They discovered we belong to a different, like mix of blood. We have Aboriginal blood, then we have Southern China, and the Southern China blood come from somewhere else instead of Northern. So we're not
also Northern China as well, right?
Yeah, but then, like I said, Taiwan is a collection of world genes, so we are a place of our own. That's Benedict Anderson's argument, right? If you mix blood, then you become different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, I want to thank you all, and especially